Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How are you today? Well, it's Friday evening, and I usually don't make videos after work, but I just feel energized and in the mood to make one for you today. So I wanted to start with moving forward. This is the third part of the sensory motor psychotherapy process. So the first part had to do with developing resources. Then we did working with memory, especially traumatic memory. And now we're onto the moving forward set of concepts and skills. So you might notice some similarities with the older stuff because they kind of build upon them. But there's a lot of good stuff in here. So I hope you'll stay with me on the rest of this journey. So today we're starting with the legacy of attachment. Okay, so I'm going to pull this up for us. Okay, so you may have heard the term attachment before. Okay, and I do have some videos on attachment styles. So if you want to learn about which style of attachment you have and try to figure that out, I have 4 key videos on the 4 main attachment styles that you could find on my channel. Okay, but we're not going to do the style specifically today. We're just going to talk about how our early relationships with caregivers continue to impact our relationships today, and some ways we could begin to start to reshape that in order to make our current relationships better. Okay, so here we go. So let's just define a little more formally what attachment is. Okay, so in this context, attachment is our biologically driven need for affiliation with other humans that starts in infancy and extends throughout our lifespan. Okay, so when a baby is born, a baby needs caregivers. They literally cannot survive without a parent or a caregiver to help. So they develop an inborn need and ways of interacting that kind of draw the caregiver in. And the caregiver naturally is supposed to feel a connection and desire to be with the baby as well. So it's a two-way street. So the mother wants to be with the baby wants to be with the mother, for example, and they have interactions back and forth that begin to shape, especially the baby's attachment style and their expectations about others and their feelings about themselves in the world. Okay. All right, and as you might guess, because this is sensory motor psychotherapy, attachment starts with the body. So when you're a baby, you don't have verbal language yet. So you start to learn about other people through the way they interact with you and your body. So the way you're held, the way you're fed, the way you're rocked, the way you're stroked, the way you're kissed and cuddled, all tells you something about your other people. It begins to teach you about your own self-regulation, about your emotions, before you even have the language about it. Okay. And you also kind of get a sense of how people are able to respond to you. Do they respond to your needs? Do they listen to you? Do they pay attention to you? Are they sensitive to your signals? So you start to develop an early sense of this since you're a baby. Okay. So we draw conclusions about ourselves and others based on these earlier interactions. So these are, again, pre-verbal, they're procedural, they're emotional memories that are implicit, all right? And they continue in our life as we move forward. All right, there's a concept they call rupture and repair. So even in the best of relationships, we don't always get it right, okay? Even the most caring, amazing parents don't get their children's signals right all the time, or they don't respond perfectly all the time. Sometimes they, respond the wrong way, or they don't quite get it, or they're not always there, and it's not perfect, right? Naturally. But the idea is that if there's a rupture, or if there's a misattunement, that the adult will initiate a repair. So they'll kind of work through the problems and start to teach the young child that even if things go awry, we could still trust that we could work it through. The relationship won't be over just because there's a problem, right? It doesn't mean, if we have a fight that we have to end the relationship. We could have a fight and still work it out and keep a good relationship. And it makes you trust people more. So you kind of grow up believing that, things can be worked through, and that makes you more secure in your relationships, all right? Okay, but a lot of times, there's a lot of rupture without repair, especially when there's more problematic attachments with parents and children. So this starts to also shape your view about yourself and others and whether problems can be worked through or not. Okay, so we might believe that my needs are never really going to be attended to. People aren't really going to pay attention to me, or they're just going to get mad at me if I try to express my needs. So what's the point? Or that, I might not be able to trust that people will be kind to me. They're going to frighten me, or they're going to ignore me. So why should I depend on anybody? See how I can start to draw these conclusions based on maybe my parent just not being there for me, or not really getting it and never working it through or fixing it for me, right? In certain cases, especially with disorganized attachment or more traumatic attachments, the same person who is your caregiver that you run to for safety is the same person that you're also frightened of. And that could be really problematic too. It leads to freeze responses and dissociation and so forth. So if you want to learn more about that, look at my disorganized attachment video. I go over that in a lot more detail. And sometimes, if we have a frightened or frightening parent, that we get dysregulated more easily. We don't learn how to regulate our emotions, and they just kind of get much more out of control. And we have a hard time with our own stuff because our parents had a hard time with their stuff. So our animal defenses, fight, flight, freeze, gets activated more often, for example. And that might carry through in our life, that those animal responses and being out of my window of tolerance is much more common if I had a relationship with a parent where there's a lot of rupture without repair, or there was frank abuse, okay? All right. So ensuring attachment survival. So because when we're little, we absolutely need caregivers in order to survive, we have to do what we got to do in order to keep them around and keep them caring for us, because we know when we're that small, we can't do it ourselves. So we have to adapt ourselves to our caregivers to kind of keep them around, right? Makes sense, right? So our caregivers, have their own style. They have their own preferences, their own ideas about how we should be, or how a child should be, or how a boy or a girl should be, for example. And so they kind of start to shape what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So they might decide that some of our personality styles or quirks or emotions are okay, and they might give us attention or reinforcement for that. But there's other emotions we might have, or other things that we might say or do, or other interests we might have that they don't find acceptable. And they kind of, don't reinforce that so much, or they punish us for that. Okay. So then we don't really have access to our full repertoire of emotions or experiences, because we try to push aside or deny or, get rid of the ones that don't really get us attention or love. And we keep the ones that do get us more attention and love, right? Because we need to keep that relationship. But later in life, sometimes we need to reintegrate the stuff that we had to throw away to survive earlier on, because we feel a little fragmented. We don't feel whole. Like maybe there's an important part of myself I had to hide in order to keep my mother's love, for example. But later on, like maybe I want to reconnect with that part of myself, right? So I did what I had to do growing up. But now that I'm older, maybe I have more choice about it. If I have greater awareness and mindfulness of the parts that I have less access to, for example, okay? So I developed my own habits of movement and emotion and thought based on some of these things, okay? Now, I've used this slide before, so those of you who are paying attention might recognize it, but it's just as relevant in this presentation as it was in the older one. I forgot exactly which one it was because I get lose track of the videos sometimes. It's just a lot of them. Okay, so our body and attachment go together, right? As I said earlier, it's like our body is the first way we learn about ourselves and our connections and other people in the world, right? So I'll read this sentence here. Through our both positive and negative interactions with early attachment figures, such as parents, we learn what kinds of sounds, facial expressions, or actions will be welcomed or rejected by them. Okay, so it's just like this, but we're going to focus on the physical stuff, sounds, facial expressions, or actions. Okay, and so let's see how some of this begins to shape who we are. So if our parents had an expectation for us to be modest and not draw attention to ourselves for whatever the reason, it could be cultural, it could just be their style, we might slump and keep our bodies small so we could stay safe and gain their approval. Okay, so that physical posturing kind of made me more acceptable to my parents. So I practiced that physical posture. It became procedural memory and became an ingrained habit that maybe I carry through my life now, that I continue to have that small kind of posturing, okay? Because that's what was acceptable back then. Okay, on the other hand, if our parents taught us to be tough and assertive, right? Keep a stiff upper lip and pull yourself up by the bootstraps and, you know, don't cry and all that stuff, right? We might unconsciously puff ourselves up, right? Maintain strong eye contact and avoid looking vulnerable. And that's what got us accepted by our parents, right? Especially, this might sound familiar to males because a lot of times like boys are supposed to be strong, right? Be the little man of the house, that kind of thing, right? So you might have practiced that kind of body language and that gained you acceptance. On the other hand, maybe we felt more disapproval from our parents for a variety of reasons. So if we looked at them and they disapproved of us, it became painful to make eye contact. It became painful to see in their face that they were rejecting us or disapproving of something that maybe we really liked. So maybe we just stopped looking at them. We stopped making eye contact because that prevented me from feeling hurt, right? Or if I reached out for help and they were too busy or they didn't respond well to me, maybe I just said, forget it. I'm not going to reach out because they're just not going to reach back. And I just learned to kind of like keep more to myself. See the body language in that guy in the picture, right? That might have been something he learned from earlier on that he's now reenacting in his current relationships. Okay, so here's some more. This is new from this presentation, by the way. Okay, so if our parents were critical, we may have made an extra effort to do things right and avoid mistakes, right? So you might have gotten a little perfectionist streak because mistakes may not have been tolerated when you grew up, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me reread the title here. Our behaviors and attachment. Okay, so the other one was our body and attachment, and we talked about the body language and so forth. So now we're going to focus on behaviors, okay? So our behaviors are shaped by our parents' responses, right? So if our parents are critical, our behavioral response is we might try to be more perfectionistic and try to do things right and avoid mistakes, because mistakes got me criticized and made me feel like I was going to be rejected by the people that I really need approval from. Okay, next. If parents responded positively to our achievements, right? Like the mom's high-fiving the daughter there, right? We may have developed patterns of high energy, goal-focused behavior designed to excel. It's like, oh, good. Mom likes it when I get good grades in school. I'm just going to really study hard and try hard and put all my effort into school. Okay. So that's the behavior that's being reinforced in me, right? Or even sports. Let's say you have a soccer mom and your mom loves that you play soccer. You might try really hard at soccer because when you play the games, you win the games, your parents love it. So that's reinforced in you, right? All right. On the other hand, let's look at the last one here. If our parents were threatened by or put down by our achievements, right? We may have learned to hold back our enthusiasm and competitive impulses. Okay, so while on the surface, sometimes parents say, oh yes, and I want the best for my child and I want them to do well in life and do better than me. Sometimes parents really secretly don't want that. Like they feel too threatened if their kid seems smarter than them or seems better at them at something that they really wish they excelled at. Like let's say, you know, I always wanted to be a musician, but I was just okay, but my kid is really talented. I might secretly try to sabotage that because I'm jealous. I'm envious that my kid is a better musician than me, right? So I might kind of shape my child to not pursue music as much because it's threatening my relationship with him. Like I can't tolerate it. My kid knows I can't tolerate it. See how that goes sometimes, right? All right. More behaviors and attachment examples. All right. So if we had stressed out parents, which is probably pretty common these days, right? Both parents are working, maybe there's a lot of kids, maybe there's financial issues. We may have learned to put aside our needs to try to comfort or help them. So you might have functioned as a parentified child, right? Or taken on more responsibility than perhaps was appropriate for your age. But you kind of learned, you know, it's more acceptable for me to take care of my parents and keep them happy than it is for me to expect my needs to be met. Okay, and that could be a behavior you take later in life as well, right? If our parents were too busy to pay attention to us, we may have become self-reliant and given up on needing their attention, right? Why should I keep reaching out if they're not going to reach back? Like that other part, right? Like we talked about with the other guy a few slides ago on the bottom, right? So behaviorally, I might just, just entertain myself. I'll just, be independent because connecting doesn't really work out for me, right? So that's more of an avoidance style of attachment, by the way. Okay, let's look at the third one. If our parents made us feel our interests were not acceptable to them, we may have learned to do what they wanted us to do and be who they wanted us to be to keep the peace. Okay, so let's say in that picture, the little girl really liked to play soccer, but her mom was like, girls don't play soccer. That's no good. So the girl was like, all right, well, I guess I'll play princess and dress up because that's what mom likes. And it keeps mom happy, right? So she might be squashing her own true interest in order to pursue an interest that's more acceptable to her parents. So what about later in life? Like maybe you're not as in touch with what you really love because you had to squash what you really loved when you were younger, right? Or you're afraid of criticism if you were to do something you loved. Okay, so as I started to hint, past relationships influence our present relationships. So some of the expectations we have of other people, we bring into our current relationships. Expectations that develop based on the way our parents were with us, we now assume about other people, right? And the way we were treated back then, we sometimes assume we're going to be treated in a similar way now, okay? So it makes sense, right? Like I develop expectations based on experience, and now I'm taking that experience and bringing it over. And sometimes I don't always upgrade that experience based on what's currently happening with me right now. Or I might unconsciously pick the same kind of people, so experiences do repeat themselves, right? All right. So our physical and behavior patterns, which we just went over, are kind of becoming our procedural learning, right? So procedural learning is like memory that's kind of unconscious. It has to do with movement. It has to do with the procedure, the way I go about things. And so that's acquired earlier on in my life. So while it was adaptive then, it may not make sense now. And so we have to upgrade. And it may not automatically upgrade. We have to take deliberate action to do it. And that's part of what we're going to talk about today. Okay. Now, exercises. So we're going to get some specifics on how to work some of these things through and how to increase our awareness of our attachment related issues. All right. So here's some key concepts that are going to keep coming up. So earlier on in the building resources section, or actually probably more the introduction section, I kind of forgot which one. We talked about the triune brain. There's a video called the triune brain. And it refers to the fact that our brain has 3 key sections. And so we're going to refer to these 3 sections of the brain a lot in these exercises. That's just how they were set up. Okay, so instead of doing the building blocks like in a lot of the other ones, we're just going to do the neocortex, which is really about my thoughts and beliefs. The mammalian brain, which has to do with my emotions, kind of like the limbic system, if you've heard of that, or the amygdala. The reptilian brain has to do with my body responses. So all the physical stuff we were talking about before, and includes the building blocks of sensation, like body sensations and movements. Okay, so instead of the building blocks, again, we're going to do the 3 brains and how those are activated in different types of relationships, past and present. We're also going to look at some similarities between past and present relationships. And some of the exercises, we're going to look at the past relationships and then relate it to the present. Other times we're going to look at present relationships and try to learn something about the past. Okay, so it's going to go a little bit both ways. And we're also going to identify some resources to help us shift these patterns. Okay, here we go. All right, so we're going to start on a positive note. So we're going to think about a positive past relational experience. Okay, even if you had a rough childhood, chances are, if you dig deep enough, you'll find some kind of positive past relational experience. It might be with a caregiver. So even if you had an abusive parent, there might have been some good times, or it might have been some other significant adult in your life. And you could think about maybe some positive moments that you've had. So let's look at the pictures here. So maybe it was skipping through the park with your parents or your uncles. Maybe it was playing chess or playing a game with your parents, or reading a book together, or practicing shaving together, or something fun like that, right? Whatever it means for you. So try to make it vivid. Think about the memory. Imagine the person's in the room with you right now. Same way as that person was during that positive experience, okay? And then reflect on how you think your 3 brains are responding. So what kind of thoughts are you having? What kind of emotions are you having? And what kind of body responses are you having? Imagine yourself with that positive, experience with that person. Okay, you can write that in your journal if you're journaling about this stuff. Okay, so here's the cool part. All right, so now that you identified that, we're going to try to harness a somatic resource from looking at that positive relational experience. So it might tell us something about what could help us in other relational experiences. So one, identify a body response that you had while thinking about that positive relational experience. So for example, maybe while I was thinking about it, I noticed my breathing slowed down, or I felt a little calm in my body, right? I noticed that different feeling came over me when I thought of that good thing. Number two, what relational knowing is reflected by your physical reaction? So that's a little more neocortex-like, okay? So what kind of conclusions did I draw about people and relationships based on some of those positive interactions? All right, so in this example, when my grandmother took care of me when I was sick, I felt that I deserved love and that people could depend on one another, okay? Number three, how can you turn this relational knowing into a somatic resource that you could use today? All right, body-mind connection. So when I could remember to breathe more slowly, which is what I identified number one, especially when I'm having an argument with my boyfriend, right? So if I'm having a difficult time now, I could modify that by bringing in that positive resource that I derived from that old memory. Okay, when I thought about, that good relational experience, my breathing slowed and my body calmed down. Now when I'm having a problem, maybe I should just slow my breathing down and try to calm my body, and that'll shape something. I could also bring out the conclusion I drew from that positive memory. So when I'm having an argument with my boyfriend, I can remind myself that, wait a minute, maybe we can depend on one another, just like I thought I could depend on one another when my grandmother was helping me, right? So I could take those positive relational knowings and physical experiences and bring it into the present when I'm struggling in a relationship. And that in itself could start to modify my experience of this current challenging relationship. All right, hope that makes sense a little bit. Okay, number four, how can you use your somatic resource, such as the breathing, to regulate the negative effects of remembering upsetting experiences with an attachment figure? All right, so obviously not all our memories are good ones, but when I think about, let's say, the breathing slowly and the calming of the body, how could bringing that in to my repertoire when I'm having a bad memory help me? Okay, so here we go. When I feel dysregulated, when thinking about how my father left us when I was a child, I can remember that my grandmother cared for me and breathe slowly. Okay, so I can bring in some of that, somatic resource of the slow breathing, and they even threw in, a little bit of a relational knowing as well. Okay, so that kind of might balance out some of the negative conclusions and body responses I had from that negative memory, right? They kind of like infuse each other and it kind of neutralizes it a little bit more. All right, I hope this isn't too confusing. When I say it out loud, it sounds more confusing than it is in my mind, but I hope it's coming across okay. Okay, so now we're gonna, go to a negative past relational experience, part one. So this time, think about negative experience with a childhood attachment figure, such as a parent, and select one experience you're willing to explore. So just to get some ideas, we got some pictures here where maybe you were feeling left out, or you weren't being paid attention to, or you felt jealous because your sibling was getting more attention than you, or you felt invalidated or criticized or attacked in some way, right? Maybe there's something like that going on that felt pretty bad, especially at the time. So now imagine that person's in the room with you and the person's just as that person was during the relational experience. So maybe they're just as disapproving or just as angry or just as dismissive. So now with that in mind, reflect on how your three brains are responding. So your thoughts and beliefs, your emotions, and your body responses, including sensations and movements. Okay. So this is still part of that exercise, all right? So describe the relational knowing that you received from this individual. So what did that person teach you about relationships based on the way they were treating you? So did you learn like, I can't trust people, or people are two-faced, or they'll be nice in public and then in private, they're not so nice to me, or people are only trying to control me, or people just won't be there for me when I really need them. Was it some conclusions such as that? or something else. So how do you think this relational knowing you learned from this person affects your relationships today? So in your current relationships, are you bringing this idea in that I just can't trust other people, or people are just going to try to control me in some way, or they only are looking out for their own self-interest and they're not really going to care about me, right? Am I currently thinking that about current people in my life because of the past? All right. So identify any people in your life today who remind you of this relationship. All right. What feels kind of similar? Okay. Number 4, what body reactions and emotions do you experience with these people in your life today that are similar to those you experienced as a child? Okay. So how are some of the past experiences echoed in the present now? What feels kind of similar now? All right. And what resources can you use to regulate your arousal, like calm you down when you're with this person, or lessen the effect of this relational knowing? You know, how could you, let's say, reshape this idea that you can't trust anybody? Maybe there's some other way I could see the relationship, for example. Or maybe instead of being so tense around a certain person, I can remember to relax my shoulders and take a deep breath. And that might make me feel differently around this person. Or I could get back in touch with my flight response and know I can walk away if I need to, and I don't have to be trapped with somebody who's making me feel uncomfortable. Okay, so there's there's resources I could pull out to help in my current relationships to make the situation that feels as similar as the past actually be a little different this time around. Okay, next exercise. The legacy of attachment in current difficult relationships. So now we're going to start from the present and trace back, right? The other ones we started from the past and we traced up. Now we're going to do the opposite. So think about a current relationship you have that you find a little bit difficult or challenging, okay? It could be a partner, it could be a boss, a client, a friend, a parent, a child. What's a relationship you're having now that is feeling difficult for you? And then describe the thoughts, emotions, and body sensations you're experiencing in that relationship, right? So going back to those 3 brains again, how are those operating now in your current relationship? So once you identify that, think about the similarities between these 3 brains, past and present. Oh, okay. I think I felt this way before. This isn't brand new, right? Okay, probably. So describe difficulties in early relationships that feel similar to this current difficulty. So now we're putting the pieces together. And of course, we're going to try to modify it. So identify some resources. They're saying 3 resources, could be a little more or less, you can use to help separate the past from the present and make the present a little bit better. Regulate yourself a little bit more in the present so that you have a new experience. Okay. So now we're going to flip it and end on I think this is the last one. So end on a positive note. So legacy attachment in current positive relationships. Okay. So think of 2 current relationships that are enjoyable and positive most of the time, right? Never perfect, but if generally speaking, if you generally feel good and positive and relaxed around this person, you trust this person. Okay. Again, could be a friendship, a partner, a parent, a relative, a coworker, whatever works for you. Okay. So how do these current positive relationships impact your 3 brains? Okay. Thoughts, emotions, body sensations. And do the thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and body responses remind you of elements of your childhood relationships? So some of the things that feel positive now actually echo some positive things from a long time ago. Or if not, does it reflect something that was missing, right? Are you now experiencing something new that you didn't have before? So maybe you finally put it back in place in your life, okay? And that's always a good thing. All right, and I had a feeling that was the last one. Okay, so some stuff to think about, right? Some really good awareness building, insight building exercises, and some tips for starting to make some positive changes, right? To help you move forward, right, in your relationships. Okay, guys, thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon. All right, bye for now.